Welcome to the Nation, Merealisasi Belanjawan 2026. I'm Nadia Abdul and joining me is INTAN NADIA JALIL, Regional Head of Group Economic and Market Analysis at CIMB, as we take a closer look at the budget, what it means, what stood out, and of course, what's next in terms of delivery and results. Thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me again.
Now, there's much debated over the budget. Many have said that there were many good things, but also some concerns about where we're heading. So let's talk about the budget and government spending on the whole, right? So we know that the deficit is smaller this year, and we also know that GLC contributions are now part of the government spending. So what does that really tell us?
I'm not quite sure if the GLC spending is strictly part of the government spending, because strictly speaking, and by, say, IMF definitions, which we normally use for international comparisons, government spending is basically development expenditure, which is, your expenditure that is spent on infrastructure, the ones that are budgeted under our Malaysia plans, that's development expenditure. And then there's operational expenditure, right, which is the running cost of the government, which is, emoluments, which is salaries and pensions of everyone under the civil service. It includes what's called supplies and services, which is payments towards, say, consultants or vendors that work directly with the government, etc. Generally speaking, the spending by government-linked corporations is not part of that measurement. And I guess if you take a look at the detailed numbers, when it comes to the 3.5% deficit, what's included is actually that operational expenditure plus development expenditure. So that line item is 419 billion ringgit, right, as opposed to 170 billion. I guess, though, strictly speaking, I'm just guessing here, obviously, because I don't have direct access to how they calculate this. I'm guessing, and perhaps we'll get more details later on, but that was included inside the budget speech because that contribution or those contributions will be used towards certain expenditures of the budget. And it has been the case generally, particularly when it comes to these more venture capital or financing type initiatives where, you've got, before this it was Penjana Capital and then Dana Pemacu, that does sort of is geared towards economic development and national development. So that's perhaps why they folded it in. But yet again, coming back to the numbers as a whole, it would be 419 billion over the GDP, the projected GDP.
And if we're talking about subsidies, we know that subsidies are still a main part of the budget, but should we be, perhaps shifting towards direct cash aid instead? Because we know that in the past, Budget Malaysia has also included about 80 billion annually on subsidies and social assistance. What are your thoughts for this budget?
I can only speak from my educational background and experience as both an economist and a policy researcher before this. I can't speak about the political realities at hand, but generally speaking, subsidies in general have a more distortionary effect on the economy, if you think about it. I mean, and I guess even from the messaging about implementing BUDI 95 and previously when it came to reducing petrol subsidies as a whole, we know that petrol subsidies in general benefit those on the higher economic scale, right? Because if you have more money, you have a more expensive car, that then requires more petrol in general, which is why the BUDI 95, I imagine, is structured in that way. So it doesn't affect those who need it the most. When it comes to cash transfers, from economic theory and general practice, it's actually a more efficient and effective method of providing what's called social welfare transfers to people who need it the most. Now, a lot of countries target it. So, you've got what was called the Bolsa Familiar in Brazil, which was targeted to lower income families. It was a direct cash transfer, but then it was predicated on the condition that they send their children to school. Some countries have perhaps what's called universal transfers. I think the 100 ringgit, Sarah, that was given to all of us. And that's typically a more efficient and cost-effective method to provide social welfare transfers, because you give direct cash to people, then people can spend it however they wish. The assumption, of course, is everyone's an adult, they will spend it on, and generally that's the case, right? It increases the welfare benefits to the people who need it the most. And although there's always the argument that, oh, you don't want to be giving money to the 220s and the M40s, whatever, right?
That was highly debated.
That's highly debated. But I think there are ways to manage that, right? I mean, because economics is always, it's not a closed system. There are always checks and balances and incentive structures that you can implement in order to counteract what's called these either perverse incentives or unintended consequences. So if you were to give, say, 100 million to everybody, but then on the other hand, you perhaps increased marginal taxation on the income level, then that could, you can kind of claw back the amount, and it doesn't cost as much administratively speaking. You don't have to generate a new implementation system.
So there are other ways of balancing.
There's always
what you give
other
out
ways
and
of
what you take back.
balancing, right? But in general, subsidies are always going to be distortionary. That's always the case. It's just not a theory, it's in actual practice, because when you subsidize, you don't know who actually is benefiting from it. Sometimes it can also be when you subsidize, say, electricity, for instance, right? We have electricity subsidies for the public, so households, but also companies. And sometimes you can be subsidizing polluting companies. So it's a perverse incentive. So in that sense, if you want to increase social welfare, you would provide a cash transfer instead and do away with subsidies. And then there are also other economic regulation methods that you can implement.
What do you think are some of the more innovative sort of regulation methods that Malaysia could probably look into moving forward when you're talking about the difference between, you know, we've also tried digitization, some of these transfers that have happened, including using our MyCard or My.
I think that's actually a good example of how you can actually utilize technology and digitization in order to make social transfers more efficient, because everybody in general has a MyCard, or should have a MyCard. And if they don't have a MyCard and are Malaysian citizens, they should be helped to get MyCard.
And also an incentive to get your MyCard.
Exactly,
right.
exactly speaking. And we've always had that chip. So it's a good way to utilize existing technologies in order to provide these cash transfers to people, because whilst we do have a high financial intermediation rate and higher than most countries, we also have a very high internet penetration rate in comparison to other countries of our own development levels. And there are other ways to transfer money to people. There's PayNet, for instance, that everybody tends to use. And actually, I just found out that Malaysia has the second highest non-cash transfers after China, which, so that's something that we can actually really utilize.
Yeah, and it also, I think, ties in with not only our digital penetration, but our internet usage and device usage per country, per number of population.
Yes.
Nadia, so in 2026, operating expenditure is currently pegged at around 338.2 billion. About development expenditure will be around 81 billion, with off-budget investments adding approximately 50.8 billion. Where do you see the government being able to save without cutting into what people depend on?
I've always mentioned, and I think this is fact, that the largest but most contentious category of operational spending is emoluments. And that's a very hard, very difficult item to actually adjust. But if you're going to shift the needle in terms of cutting down on government spending, in terms of fiscal consolidation, there would have to be some inroads to be made there. And I think we've seen from recent announcements in the previous years, I think they're setting the ground in terms of some level of civil service reforms, in terms of making headway in cutting down that number. Because of the fact that we're heading into a situation of greater global challenges, greater external challenges, not just from geopolitical developments, but also from environmental challenges, that would entail a greater need to help the public and more people, right? So you don't want to sacrifice basic goods and necessities and services, and I count health and education as those basic goods and services. So I think in order to be seen to be fair to the people, but also recognizing that things are going to be tough for everybody. There needs to be some give and take. So you have to see some headway, you know, on one hand with civil service, without sacrificing service delivery, obviously, and saving where we can. So I guess one of the main ways that perhaps the government should consider is taking a look at where there are overlaps in terms of agency functions. Perhaps, I'm not sure, because obviously not there, but you know, But I
think the Madani government has actually, in some senses, looked at where overlaps lie and where efficiencies can be kind of accelerated. Now, with the global economy slowing down in future, possible, looking at where we're heading, how much room do we actually have to spend?
We have the amount that's we have to spend.
How do we have enough room to keep spending the way we're spending?
We have some room, but that room gets narrower by the day. And I say that because the cost of debt to the government will generally increase. I mean, currently we have relatively low interest rates, right? But that's at the Malaysia level. OPR is at 2.75%. But the debt is always financed by national government bonds, which would have to be paid by interest, right?
Yes.
So as long as that interest stays low, it's fine. However, there are external upward pressures on that interest rate, mainly from the fact that there is currently still a big differential between our rates and the US rates, which is, you know, still, like it or not, the safe haven currency of global investors worldwide. And that's always the comparison. So if, you know, financial investors, and particularly institutional investors, think that they get higher returns from, you know, basically saving in US dollars, there's going to be less people who want to save in Malaysian ringgit. So that's that external pressure that they have to fight against. And I think currently it's fine, but yeah, there's increasingly less room.
There's increasingly less room, and I think the pressures, just now we saw on screen the 470 billion budget pie chart that was showing us what all the different components are. So in a nutshell, how well do you think the budget lineup that we've seen and the long-term goals that we're seeing actually kind of align with Ekonomi Bandani and the 12th Malaysia Plan?
Yeah, I think one area that perhaps we want to take a look at more is the development expenditure. I took a look at the numbers, and I think that's 5 billion reduction in the development expenditure budget. I'm wondering if I don't think there are any sacrifices that have been made. Perhaps it is a matter of spending smarter. As efficiency versus heft, and efficiency versus volume. So quality rather than quantity. But again, I guess there's always room to save. And I think it would be great if we could see what those incentives and initiatives are in terms of more savings that the government could make. Because, you know, whenever you announce, you know, oh, we're going to raise all prices, the messaging there is different. Actually, we're going to cut subsidies.
Yes.
And we're going to channel it back to the people. That's a different kind of messaging, right? And we're going to make more savings in these areas. You know, for instance, are there overlaps in different agencies? Yes, there's been great starts that the government has implemented. And you know, it'd be great to see more of those measures.
I think the devil's in the details. In the next few months and weeks, we're probably going to see the outlining of the big numbers that we've seen. I know that the different ministries are now thinking about how this is going to be communicated to their stakeholders. But briefly, when we're talking about, we spoke about the environment, we talked about transport in our Friday discussion. Do you see those policies finally connecting, or are we still seeing silos and disparate movements?
Perhaps they're connecting in some ways, you know, with regards to the moves towards promoting the usage of EVs. You can see that there's a connection there between concerns for the environment in terms of reducing carbon emissions and tying it to transportation, and also renewing, scrapping cars, I imagine, because that's going to be utilized. The hope or the intention there is for when people scrap the old cars, they might spend it on EVs or hybrid vehicles, because that's where the incentives lie. But I think in order to, again, move that needle, you know, one of the statements that we made on Friday was like, winter is coming.
Yes, winter is coming.
Climate change is here. Yeah. It's not coming, it's here, and we have to face it. I think that could be greater connection between public transport and the environment, and not just obviously in urban areas, but how do you connect semi-urban and rural areas, right? What is the last mile? And even within urban areas themselves, I mean, there have been great strides when it comes to last mile development in KL. We were just having a discussion pre the show amongst those of us within the production staff that public transport has made great strides. I myself am a user of public transport, and actually I benefit a lot from that last mile connectivity. I mean, the bus transportation to MRT stations has been great. But I'm extremely privileged to be living in KL, to be living near an MRT station. I wonder what the situation is like for somebody, say, living in Seremban that might not live near an MRT station. What more somebody living in, say, Pulai, for instance, do they have that same last mile connectivity? So I guess there's more, if there could be more focus towards those areas, then perhaps we can see the movement in the needle. I'm not sure whether you've seen, that comparison between the carbon emissions that mass transit produces, say, MRT or bus, compared to single-use vehicles. And like it or not, an EV is still a single-use vehicle.
Yes, it is. And I think it's interesting because when you're talking about the connectivity of transport, there has been strides, I believe, over the year, not only just by the MOT, but also interministerially on how we're going to be able to ensure that, for example, all the public transports that come to Central or Kuala Lumpur Central, how does that kind of connect to all of the other posts outside of Klang Valley? You've definitely hit a nail there. Now, when we're talking about social welfare, and we spoke about this a lot, and it's something that I think is close to the heart of a lot of the rakyat. Coming out of the budget, a lot of the questions were really on that.
Right.
When we're talking about B40, OKU, senior citizen support, which we know is definitely something that we have to continue to do better. What are your thoughts on the budget that just came out? Does it work? What is it just good on paper, or is there something to shout about?
No, I think pretty much that the increased allocation and the continued focus on helping out the OKU and those are marginalized within society is a great move. That's rarely ever forgotten within the budget, and I think there's greater emphasis now, and there's inclusion on mental health, which is always a welcome development. I wonder, however, if we need a philosophical shift in a way, in the sense that sometimes I feel that there's a paternalistic attitude towards OKU or the disabled and then senior citizens, or even say B40, when we say B40, which is basically just a statistical construct, right? Like, oh, we need to channel money there, but is there an actual commitment towards inclusivity? Take, for instance, I would say OKU education, just at the children level. So in some countries, the philosophy is that you should include the child as much as possible within mainstream education. So provide help, for instance, financing a shadow for autistic children. Allowing them to be part of the mainstream classroom as much as possible. Acknowledging that, I think with when we see the disabled, it's actually because society is disabling.
Yes, definitely.
As opposed to the individual itself being disabling. So are there moves to actually include OKU? I guess, and this is where I emphasize that the budget is simply one
of the many tools, the
many arsenal that the government has to employ in order to implement its own national development goals, right? It has to be supported by institutional and legal support. So can I just finish the thought? So when it comes to the KU, we have to take a look at the People with Disabilities Act. Is it actually implemented? You can say that, we can mandate that, companies have to recruit OKUs, but is there protection against discrimination? Etc.
Rightly so. And when we're talking about the Persons with Disability Act, it actually needs to be read in tandem with so many other acts that are already available, including our Child Act, Child Protection Act. And you rightly pointed out, one is the handout, one is the social protection, the other is the enablement of the community and ensuring that they have the support system and the infrastructure to be able to develop to their best capacity. Now, when we're talking about delivery and accountability, it's something that we love talking about. We've spoken about this several times now. But with the Public Spending and Fiscal Responsibility Act 2023, now we know that it's placed, procurement reforms are meant to tighten governance. And then we also know that, there's off-balance sheet spending. How do we keep track of all this, and do you see that we're on the right track?
So our balance sheet spending can be actually tracked through the contingent liabilities. Part of it can be tracked, the contingent liabilities. However, I think these acts are excellent. I mean, I was extremely excited to see the implementation and the approval and the implementation of these acts. What would strengthen is the institutional framework, I think, and also would be a welcome development by institutional and global investors is perhaps slightly more oversight when it comes to government-linked companies. So we actually mention government-linked companies a lot,
Yes.
but there is actually no legal definition of what a government-linked company is.
Yes.
We don't know who's a,
Yes.
you know, we know for instance, we've heard Petronas and Khazanah and PNB, etc. But they're all actually previously under Prime Minister Abdul Badawi's government. There was
Yes.
the Putrajaya Commission on High Performance, or
Correct.
GLCs, and these were termed GLICs, which is government-linked investment companies.
Yes.
But if you're going to define a government-linked company as a company in which government has direct and indirect ownership, I mean, I myself, supposedly CIMB, which is a public listed company,
Yes.
is a government-linked company. So would those companies not have a different governance framework compared to the direct government-linked investment companies? And this is not to mention I mean, there are literally thousands of state-owned
Enterprises.
state-linked enterprises,
Yes.
right? If you think about, you know, perhaps any enterprise that's called MB Inc.,
Yes.
that's a state-owned company. How is oversight
Or
there?
any state corp.
Or exactly, or you know, there's a lot. There are a lot. So there are various measures that you need to implement in order to ensure conflicts of interest, particularly, don't happen.
Definitely.
There. So you know, something like working towards a State-Owned Enterprises Act, similar to, you know, the implementation framework of the Government Procurement and Financial Responsibility Act.
Do you foresee any perhaps countries in ASEAN that already have an SOE Act that you believe would be a good?
This is so not my area. Sorry,
Potentially it's something to look at, because as you rightly pointed out, right, if we don't necessarily have a definition of what a government-linked investment company actually is, then anyone can potentially claim to be, or those that have been by inference attached as a government-linked investment company, even when you want to say that, you know, we're actually a separate entity with separate governance altogether.
I'm not sure within ASEAN. I have to double check within that, because I remember this was a contentious issue when, back in the day when Malaysia was still going to negotiate a free trade agreement one-on-one with the US.
Yes.
But ironically, the US now has very murky rules when it comes to state-owned enterprises, right? So
that's the challenge on governance.
Exactly, right? You can see that we're institutional. I mean, this is a country that is vaunted supposedly for its institutional strength, and look what's happening now. So I think that's a cautionary tale for us.
Definitely.
That yes, you may think that your institutions are strong enough, but they can never be too strong, because there are always more checks and balances that should be implemented, and they should always be re-examined and renewed for the future.
Definitely. Now, very briefly, we know that we've been chasing AI and tech. What about AI and tech in the current budget that we should be excited about, if there is any, that you believe should be highlighted?
I was thinking that's expenditure, right? Okay.
Yes, for example, in the space of care economy or the space of creative economy and
right,
sectors.
right. I always think that, I think there are some allocations towards AI. Was there not a measure announced whereby lecturers who went on to set up their own companies, particularly AI related, would be granted sabbaticals, etc.
And then I think there's also a 30 million investment to expand on the MyCIF program for high economic impact sectors, which of course could include things like creative and agrotech. But other than that, I think with our reliance on AI and the movement towards tech, how do you foresee using these two tools to perhaps develop that delivery and accountability safety nets that is necessary?
Yeah, I think this is where I need to correct a statement that was made by both Shiming and Rajrin last Friday, because they were like firmly putting me on the anti-AI camp because I mentioned Terminator and Skynet, etc. I hope my age is not showing there. Anyway, I'm not completely anti-AI. I see AI as just a tool, really, and like many tools, it has to be wielded effectively and intelligently so that it doesn't become a weapon against us, right? We've seen even now there are various news reports of what's called AI psychosis, and this is particularly related to these language learning models like ChatGPT, where you have young people, or not even young people, actually relying on these language learning software as their therapist. And that then links actually to the care economy, because what does that say about our support for mental health, that people are actually going to what's essentially a machine for emotional support.
And on top of that, Friday when we had the budget, it was also World Mental Health Day. So.
Exactly. So, I mean, I was just thinking that, my God, these software, this tool isn't even sentient yet, and yet there's a psychosis related to this tool. How careful should we be? And again, sometimes you tend to get a bit excited at the shiniest thing, the shiniest, newest thing, right? Without taking a look at what are the unintended consequences and external costs. So AI data centers, for instance, have been responsible for environmental damage, particularly because of their requirement for high water resources.
Yes.
So there's always the good and the bad, and we need to manage that. We need to manage both the benefits and to ensure that as many people and as many parts of society benefit as usual, and mitigate the costs.
Thank you for that, Nadia. I think we need another session where we actually discuss the details of where we're seeing the budget 2026 go. But of course, today's discussion has shed some light on how the budget 2026 brings both opportunities and challenges. But ultimately, its success, of course, will depend on its implementation, its governance, and of course, monitoring. Now, what will be felt by everyday Malaysians is going to be the proof of the pudding. This conversation, of course, was with Nadia Jalil. Thank you so much for staying with us. And stay safe and be kind.